I'm Yulia, the voice of the podcast Love to Heal, a journey of self-discovery, healing, and spiritual growth. Hello. Thank you for joining me on today's episode. Reminder, if you have been enjoying this content, please share it with your friends. That is the best way to show your support. Today's episode is about depression. And what I'd like to start out with is the question, what is depression, really? Author Sergei Lazarev explains it as a deep dissatisfaction with oneself, one's fate, and the world around. Depression is a lack of faith in the future and in oneself. It's a constant aggression towards love. And remember that love is God. When a person internally strives towards God as the main source of happiness, then he or she does not depend on the world around and doesn't become a slave to it. When a person loses faith in God and the strive towards God, he or she begins to strive towards the world, the earthly, the material. And as we know, all this does not last. And when we are so attached to something earthly, when we lose it, what happens? We become depressed or ill, or in some cases even suicidal. And this goes for everything earthly. Money, job, friendship, marriage, and yes, even our loved ones fall into the category of earthly, and that on which we should never depend, never become slave to, or worship. I've mentioned this in previous episodes. The only thing we can depend on is God, because that's the only constant we have. Everything else is temporary. When a person starts to worship the earthly, putting that in front of God, then, unfortunately, the world around begins to collapse. If a person is not following his or her soul's calling, and if there's no God, no connection to the divine, problems are simply unavoidable. Lessons will be taught and learned as many times as it is necessary until that person gets back to his or her origin, to the true nature of all people, our divine nature. We are on this planet to try and remember who we are, to look past our social conditioning, to discover that love rules the world. And this love is a life force, an energy waiting to be used and applied to all situations and people. If a person doesn't see the divine will in what's happening, he or she will feel pain, feelings of sadness, unfairness. They will likely blame others for what's going on. They will feel heartbreak. They might feel hopelessness, and thus will fall into depression. If a person doesn't see depression as salvation, doesn't see it as an opportunity to get closer to God, then that person will fall even deeper into depression and move farther away from God. From this point, it's extremely difficult to return to normalcy, and no medication is strong enough to give someone depressed their happiness back. Let me put it in different terms. When a person loses a goal, he or she loses strength and energy. When a false goal is destroyed, a person not only loses the drive, but subconsciously doesn't want to continue living. And the energy circuit of that person begins to fade. The only situation in which a person will not fade, will not become despondent, is if his goal is unity with God. Again, this is because the goal of God is eternal. It cannot be destroyed. It's impossible to lose, and therefore, in any conditions, a person will survive and will want to continue living because the goal will continue to be there. Moreover, an internally believing person, and let me stress the word internally here, because people who go to church or other religious institutions just for the check mark, let's say, those people don't count. Real believing spiritual people cannot become depressed by definition. If a person feels that the divine lives in him or her, then the divine will is, among other things, his or her own will. If this understanding is lost, then the human will begins to compete with the divine. And this is where the ego comes in, by the way. And the greater the discrepancy, the greater the despondency. Furthermore, depression is the unwillingness to sacrifice to God, to lose the present for the sake of the eternal. And examples of sacrifice include things like everyday prayer, good works, charity, loving others despite their flaws or aggression, and fasting. Believe it or not, depression and self-interest come from the same root. A person wants to get something from fate and the future, but his dreams and hopes collapse. And now he no longer loves either his future or his fate. And the more a person depends on fate and the future, the more he dreams of receiving, the stronger his dependence and the stronger the depression will be. Just this week in the news was the death of Liam Payne, a singer from the band One Direction. Think about it. How many stars have died at a young age? Many were depressed and on drugs, like Liam Payne, in whose system autopsy reports revealed a mix of various drugs, including crack and cocaine. Of course, I'm speculating here, but I'm ready to bet that spiritual, God-oriented people are not drug addicts, and I will explain why. You see, a drug is seen by people as a way to escape reality. A non-believer will have a really tough time when his or her goals in life fail, when there are hardships and heartbreaks in life, right? Or some will reach great fame and riches only to find out that that's not happiness, and they will wonder, well, what now? I am famous and I'm rich, and what's next? Something is still missing from my life. But if they don't realize what their higher purpose is, or learn that the only true source of happiness is God, they will start to feel hopeless and depressed because life will have lost meaning. And then the drugs start to make sense because at least they allow the non-believer to temporarily feel bliss or not feel anything at all. It's very sad because happiness and purpose are so close. They're so easy to attain, but our culture has created such heavy stigmas around God and religion that many people don't want anything to do with it. And I know because I was one of those people that was so turned off by the notion of believing in something I couldn't see. But now that I am a believer and now that I see how much better my life has become, I can't even fathom how so many people would rather turn to drugs, for example, or make fame or money their ultimate goal in life when it's pretty clear that none of the earthly possessions or pleasures can make a human truly happy. It might make us happy for a day, okay, maybe a month, but then what? After the novelty wears off and after you start to take things for granted, then what? People get bored of their toys, their jobs, the people around them, and then the search begins again for something newer, better, sexier, you name it. But it feels so amazing to have found the one and only, the one that will always be there for me, that loves me unconditionally, the one that I strive towards and which makes me a better person. I could go on and on, but finding God has got to be the greatest everlasting happiness on earth. And it is this feeling of love towards God that gives humans the most life force, the most energy to do and achieve anything we put our mind to have great health, wonderful relationships, and success all around. As you can probably tell, I love talking about this. But getting back to depression, though, which is a very dangerous emotion, I should say, for a person because it's difficult to track the accumulation of aggression in and towards oneself. Dissatisfaction with oneself and one's fate becomes an attempt to destroy one's fate, which includes our body and our consciousness. What occurs with long-lasting depression is that it creeps into the subconscious and turns into a powerful self-destruction program. Oftentimes, depression leads to oncology, and most prone to oncology, by the way, are those people who self-criticize, regret about the past, constantly criticize the shortcomings of others, and reject the world around them. Additionally, depression is dangerous because it is a rejection of one's future on the most subtle plane. If the person is dissatisfied with the future in advance, this person will not be allowed into the future because if we don't want to believe in ourselves in the future, we basically destroy the structure of our I, in quotations, our temporary body in the future. Also, depression is most dangerous for women because it can affect her children and grandchildren, especially if the mother is depressed before conception and during pregnancy. The mother's emotions actually shape the child's future, worldview, and character. And if the mother doesn't like herself or her fate, this program will be strengthened in the child. Depressed people might say that their condition appeared without any apparent reason, but in reality, there is usually one reason, which is a reaction to soul cleansing. You see, the soul must be cleansed periodically. For example, when children are about to be born, or when it's necessary to prepare for the next life, or when divine energy is making headway. Currently, on a planetary scale, we are going through a cleansing process for our souls, and it occurs as a destabilization, if you will, or temporary loss of basic human values. Naturally, a person reacts to the subconscious humiliation of higher feelings in the same way as he or she did before when humiliated on the external level, which is hatred, jealousy, resentment, and depression. Unfortunately, for most people that are non-believers and are not spiritual, the cleansing of the soul will cause a subconscious protest, hatred, a program of self-destruction, instead of the much-needed impulse to love and God. Subsequently, This means that for many, the salvation of the soul will turn into misfortunes, illnesses, or death of the body. On the contrary, a person who sees the presence and will of God in everything will accept any situation, maintaining love and not searching for the guilty. Such a person can undergo soul purification by inertia without even suspecting it. And finally, let's take a look at how to best deal with depression. First and foremost, we must accept everything that has happened and can happen. We must thank God for helping our soul, and we must maintain love. We need to enjoy every moment of life and give energy, remembering that any situation is given to us by God, and therefore it is for us, not against us. If we have love, we will survive. One useful tactic in combating depression is to think less. Our most primitive feelings are wiser than our smartest thoughts. Our feelings contain the experience of hundreds of years, both in the past and future. We need to turn on optimism at the level of consciousness. Often, a person perceives a state of apathy, lack of desires, and loss of interest in life as a catastrophe. But what he or she might consider as a misfortune was in fact just detachment from life, and it is in this state that new energy is taken in. In this state, one must rejoice and pray, and the new energy will be healing and life-changing. When all is great and interest in life is at its maximum, it's more difficult to remember God. In short, a cooling of interest in life, that which we call depression, actually happens because it provides an opportunity for understanding the world and taking in new divine energy. Again, author Sergei Lazarev proposes that sometime in the future, humanity will undergo an energetic transformation, and feelings of contempt, superiority, and despondency will cause physical pain in people. And thinking badly about another person or the world around us will result in deadly consequences. Of course, we're not there yet, but it is wise to prepare by staying optimistic, by loving ourselves and the world around us, as well as accepting everything in our life as divine will. Thank you so much for listening. I will leave you today with a beautiful poem by the British-American poet Denise Levertov. Enjoy, and until next time. To live in the mercy of God. To lie back under the tallest, oldest trees, how far the stems rise before ribs of shelter open. To live in the mercy of God, the complete sentence too adequate has no give. Awe, not comfort, stone elbows of stony wood beneath lenient moss bed. And awe suddenly, passing beyond itself, becomes a form of comfort, becomes the steady air you glide on, arms stretched like the wings of flying foxes, to hear the multiple silence of trees, the rainy, forest depth of their listening. To float upheld as salt water would hold you once you dared. To live in the mercy of God, to feel vibrate the enraptured waterfall fleeing itself, unabating down and down to clenched fists of rock. Swiftness of plunge, hour after year after century. Oh, or ah, uninterrupted voice, many-stranded, to breathe, spray the smoke of it, arcs of steel-white foam, glissades of fugitive jade barely perceptible, such passion, rage or joy, thus not mild, not temperate, God's love for the world vast, flood of mercy, flung on resistance.